Hi guys, and welcome to Done It Up, and today we're going to be talking about game phases. Game phases. So this was something that was actually brought up in the broader Heroclix community across, I believe, the Facebook groups. And that is, someone mentioned that Heroclix should have defined phases like card games do, like Magic or the old versus system. And it kind of took me aback a little bit because it does. It may not be clearly defined in the rulebook, but it does have phases when it comes down to what you do on your turn and when you do it. So the first thing I want to touch on is beginning of the game. Now this isn't necessarily in the game or in the turn order, but the very beginning of the game, there will be certain effects like placing down a character or enacting Highfather's Pact or Thanos hurts people. And one of the things that is commonly missed by players is that when you are doing your beginning of the game effects, is that both players do it. So first you'll start with whoever won the initiative roll, so you'll go with the first player. They'll resolve all of their beginning of game effects, and then the other player will resolve all of their beginning of the game effects before you even start your first turn. Now, more often than not, I've seen this played out that the first player will do their beginning game effects, do their entire first turn, and then the second player will do their beginning of game effects and then their entire first turn. It doesn't necessarily change the game too much, but there is going to be that situation where it makes a difference to resolve those effects when they're supposed to be resolved. So, first thing, beginning of the game effects. Now once you actually start getting into your turns, you're going to start with the beginning of the turn phase. Now this is actually very clearly defined because there are effects that happen during the beginning of the turn and can't be done any other time during your turn. So beginning of your turn, you resolve any of your beginning of your turn effects, and then you do any free actions that you want to do. I'm going to say this a lot because free actions can be done any time on your turn. So beginning of the turn. One of the things that actually caused players to question was when the ID cards came out. And that it has been stated for a while that the beginning of the turn ends when the first non-free action is given. However, if you have a non-free action that is given specifically during the beginning of the turn, like the ID cards, that won't end the beginning of the turn. So, of course, with anything in Heroclix, follow the rules until you run into the exception. So, once the beginning of the turn is completed, and you get into the main action phase, this is where you're going to use up the actions in your action pool. And once again, any free actions that you want to be given during that time. This will be when you're doing your special powers, your standard PAC powers, moving around the map, interacting with your opponent, attacking, rolling dice. This is the big chunk, massive part of your turn. This is probably going to be the longest part of your turn. This is where the big main beef happens. And then you get the end of the turn. Now, much like the beginning of the turn, the end of the turn effects can only be done once you are done with your actions. Now, you don't actually have to give every action that you have in your action pool, especially if you have other characters that add to your action pool, like the most recent shield guys. When they make attacks, they add actions to your action pool. Sometimes it's impossible to actually give out all those actions, but once you are done, whether that pool is depleted or not, you move into your end of game turn. So your end of game effects, all of those get resolved, and once again, the free actions. Now, there are certain characters like the Sloth. If you weren't given any actions during your turn, you get to heal at the end of your turn. Now, just because you resolved your end of turn effect there doesn't mean that you can't further do more free actions, because those are just done everywhere, all the time, anytime. The only way to actually signify that your turn is done, this is very important, I want to stress this, so many people are guilty, I'm guilty of doing this. The end of turn actually, your turn is actually complete when you clear your action tokens. So that signifies to your opponent that now it is his turn to start his beginning of turn effects. This is the only time you don't do free actions. That actually just ends your, flat out ends your turn. So clearing the action tokens ends your turn. This is something that I like to point out to newer players. I know a lot of older players have the bad habit of it. I have done it on occasion, is to clear action tokens and then be like, oh, but I wanted to perplex this, or I wanted to outwit that. Technically, you're not allowed to do that, but that also comes down to etiquette and decorum rather than strict rules. The final thing that I want to point out with different phases is that once the game starts going, you're gonna have effects that last until your next turn. Now, it's not always clear, but until your next turn is actually separate from beginning of your turn. So once you're actually into the thick of the game, when it comes back to your turn, you have to resolve all the effects that last until your next turn, and then get into your beginning of the turn effects. Now, this became a lot more prevalent when entities were brought in, because you're allowed to pick a power until your next turn, and then at the beginning of your turn, you pick a new power. So, for example, how this would be affected is if you chose super strength from an entity and you picked up an object. Now, you only have that power until your next turn. So once your turn starts up again, you have to resolve the end of that entity power, which with super strength, you actually drop the object. And then if you want to pick super strength again the next turn, the beginning of your turn, that object has been dropped in between those two phases, and if you pick super strength again, you'll actually have to move and pick up that object, even though technically it would, most people would think that you wouldn't drop it. But because there is that slight difference in the turn order phases, that effect has to resolve and then start up again. So that was the phases of Heroclix. It could be better explained in the rulebook, but once you get into the swing of things and know when things are supposed to happen, look at the text of your superpowers, of your special powers, your traits, your relics, your resources. It will tell you what phase it'll be done. If it's give an action, that's your main phase. If it's beginning of the turn, if it's beginning of the game, if it's end of turn, it'll let you know when these things are supposed to either activate or resolve. So if you have any comments, questions, concerns, anything you think I didn't go over, just comment down below, and we'll see you guys next time for another episode of Dial It Up.
Married with Clix is brought to you in part by MajesticCCG.com. Check out the new premium site with MajesticCCG.com/Apex-Insiders. Check the link below, trust me. Trying to remember that from me talking? Not gonna help. You'll get awesome articles at $3 a month, with the first month being free, from amazing writers such as Paris Gordon, Easton Brock, Aaron Cantu. I'm even going to be contributing occasionally, and if you're familiar with the Meta Lab, check out some of Mike Payne's articles. So, check it out again, MajesticCCG.com/Apex-Insiders for your look into the minds of some of the greats.